Okay, this is fun, and we just had 80 people at Temple Isaiah last week on Thursday night, and boy, talk about questions. My partner O.G. Strogatz and I do this together, and we do different ones of these presentations. Whew. And they were good questions. People had done their homework and got all they had there. And I want you to be sure that you consult your general election. And then also what came, which is also very confusing, is the, because it's all the languages, the voter information. But today we've also, our group, which includes Doug Leach and Kristen Chambers and Carol Mead and I, we're a subcommittee of the anti-racism group, and we're excited to share with you sort of some more voter education. And we are using the resources from a number of places, and some of those were in your bulletin today. And then we've also combined a fair number of those recommendations on this grid that we'll work from today. We'll be working on the state ballot propositions. So this is for all of us. This will not be our local measure Q, which is to support our local schools. We will not talk about the school board races or the judges or other things that are going to be on the ballot. But these are 10 different propositions. And you can access a number of these from our DCC website, the e-news, the bulletin. We have all those resources and events. Specifically, the anti-racism voting webpage, which is now accessible to you by a drop-down from our DCC website. So all of this stuff and background that you need for this kind of decision-making is now on our DCC website. Thank you, Doug, very much for that. And we offered to you, is there any, oh, Sandy's on. Yay, Sandy. So Sandy, we have, and Doug will bring home a grid that looks like this. It says California ballot propositions. And we're going to sort of give you a couple minutes of intro about the whole set of propositions, and then we'll start and we'll take turns talking just for 3 to 4 minutes about each one. But know that there's lots more you can read about. Okay. With a limited amount of time to cover all 10 propositions, we're going to go into each one, including the concept, the proposal itself, or the question, and then we'll talk about those who support and those who oppose, and then we'll also at some cases, and probably most of us, will talk about the money, which is also available on vote411.org. That was in your bulletin this morning. It's also a link at the DCC website, and it's also on a lot of our vote411.org. I'll pass it around. I didn't get any extras, but it's easy to remember, and it was in your bulletin today.
And Cal Matters website also has funding information.
That's right. So there's also one of the resources in the bulletin was Cal Matters. It's a very detailed analysis of a lot of those, and it also has the money, which in some of these cases is really important for you to know. Okay. We ask, or usually in the league presentations, we ask that you hold your questions until we complete the review of all 10 propositions. This didn't work at Temple Isaiah. People are going, yeah, and we ended up doing questions all the way through. And we're a small group, and if you have something burning question that we are not making sense, go ahead and ask it. It doesn't bother me. We don't have to hold those questions. It's almost more difficult at some age to remember your question till the end. So if you really don't understand something, just chime in and raise your hand and I'm sure we can answer. What's the process? This is a process called pros and cons. I know many of you have heard this before. It's a structured way to review each initiative or each initiative or proposition or measure. And we'll review the issues, the context and the arguments for each. In addition, we will provide information on the supporters and opponents of each. And then we'll try to share also the donations made to each pro and con campaign, where the money is coming from. We think this will provide a more complete picture and help you make more informed decisions. In 2024, there are 10 ballot initiatives, and this is kind of a key point I wanted to be sure and get across. 5 of these 10 on your grid are from the legislature, and 5 of them are what are called citizens' initiatives. So props 2 through 6, I keep doing that, 2 through 6 are measures that have come and gone through the legislature and been essentially certified for inclusion on the ballot. Propositions 32 to 36 are what are called citizens' initiatives. And that's a bit of a misnomer. Sometimes it's a citizen initiative. And we'll talk about 32 through 36 a little differently because that's where you'll really see the money, in this case at least. Most commonly, citizen initiatives come from those who have special interests about an issue, and often the money to pay petitioners to get and collect signatures, which are necessary for this citizen initiative. Some people the other night, they wanted to know how many signatures are needed to be approved by the Secretary of State for the ballot. And the answer is 4 to 5% of votes cast for governor in the last election. That's the number. This obscure kind of counting of how many signatures are needed to get an initiative on the ballot. 3 to 5% of votes cast for governor in the last election. Little weird, yeah. The California Constitution requires that bond issues, proposed changes in laws, and constitutional amendments, of which there are a few this time, be approved by voters. Thus, the reason for the legislature, that's why the legislature has initiatives on this ballot. So not only does the legislature all it does is authorize these to be on the ballot, but they have to be finished by the voters. Okay? That's for propositions 2 through 6. So let's go with the 10 measures. We're going to kind of do a up and back kind of thing, and we'll each participate. And I'm going to start with Prop 2. And we'll work down your grid, and hopefully by the end, you'll feel some sense of what you want to say on your ballot. Thus, the last column for you. The first, Proposition 2, it authorizes bonds for public school and community college facilities. And the question there is, should the state authorize $10 billion in bonds to build new or renovate existing public school and community college facilities? This is the key, facilities. This is not teacher salaries, this is not anything else, it's facilities. The situation is the legislature has placed Proposition 2 on the ballot. California has approximately 10,000 public schools and 115 community colleges. Many schools and community colleges have older and outdated facilities. Many need health and safety repairs, renovations, and new classrooms. According to a 2020 publication from the Public Policy Institute, 38% of California students attend schools that do not meet minimum facility standards. This includes 25% of students attending schools with damaged floors, walls, ceilings, and 14% attending schools with malfunctioning electric systems. 15% of students attend schools with extreme deficiencies, such as gas leaks, power failures, and structural damage, and the state and the school districts usually share the cost. This proposal, if passed, would authorize $10 billion in state bonds. So this, as you can see right in column 2, is a bond authorization legislative statute. So it's asking for the state and authorizing the state to do a $10 billion bond that would be paid off over 20 years. $8.5 billion, or 85% of total bond amount for public schools, and $1.5 billion, or 15% of the total bond amount for community colleges. Up to $115 million to be used to reduce lead levels, if you can believe it, in water at public school sites, and the state would pay a significantly higher share of project costs for school districts with low-income districts. The fiscal effects, or the state estimated cost to repay this bond, would be about $500 million each year for 35 years. The effect on local governments would depend on the choices that the school districts and community colleges make about the repairs, renovations, or facility changes. The supporters say that this would provide funding for outdated facilities needing repair and upgrades to meet basic health standards, provide strict taxpayer accountability for protections, and protects local control. Opponents say California already has $109 billion of outstanding and unissued bonds. Sacramento politicians overspend everything. They issue bonds and they punish us with a tax hike. Tell politicians to prioritize education funding over free health care. The supporters are yes on Prop 2, and the opponents are Assemblyman Bill Essayah, California State Legislature. But there is no organized campaign website for this. It's a bond, state bond. You can see the recommendations from all the League of Women Voters, the Friends of the Friends Committee, which are the Quakers, and Church Impact, copies of which are here, by the way, all support this measure. Okay, Kristen?
Good morning. I'm going to talk this morning about Proposition 3. And so Proposition 3 would amend the California Constitution to recognize a fundamental right to marry, regardless of sex or race. Actually, just recognizes a fundamental right to marry, period. It would remove language stating that marriage is only between a man and a woman. So you might remember, or you will remember, Prop 8 several years ago, which amended the California Constitution to define a marriage as being only between a man and a woman. So this would take that language out of the California Constitution. So for Prop 3, supporters say that this would align our California Constitution with current law and California's values. So the reason they're saying that is because after Prop 8, the U.S. Supreme Court determined that it was unconstitutional under the federal Constitution to prevent gay couples from getting married. So thereby the U.S. Supreme Court, before its current iteration, established a federally protected right to marry regardless of gender of the two individuals. And so the supporters of Prop 3 say that taking this language out of the California Constitution, so a yes vote on Prop 3 would align the California Constitution with current federal law. The supporters say that it would protect people if and when the winds in the Supreme Court change and the federal Supreme Court changes its mind about a right to marry for gay couples. And let me just tell you that that is very likely from a legal point of view, from a point of view of legal analysis where that's heading, that is possible. So supporters say that this Prop 3 would not change laws regarding age requirements for marriage or the number of people in a marriage. And the reason they raise that is because the opponents to Prop 3 have said that this is an extreme amendment, that it goes too far, that it isn't needed because same-sex couples are already allowed to marry under federal law. Opponents claim that Prop 3 removes all protections on marriage, including limitations on children, close relatives, and 3 or more people marrying each other.
Didn't they use the word incest?
I believe they may have said that too. Opponents have said that Prop 3 puts what adults want ahead of what children need by saying mothers and fathers aren't necessary. They have said also that Prop 3, quote, threatens, in capital letters, our shared values of healthy families. Those are the opponents to Prop 3. In terms of who is lining up in favor or opposed, there is a long list of organizations in favor of Prop 3, including the League of Women Voters, the Friends Committee, as you'll see on your list. Again, that's the Quakers, Church Impact, Equality California, which is a gay and lesbian rights organization, the ACLU, Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California, the Human Rights Commission, which is also a gay rights organization, California Nurses Association, and other labor groups, including the California Federation of Labor Unions, the Democratic Party, SEIU, the Sierra Pacific Synod of the Evangelical Church in America, the California-Hawaii chapter of the NAACP, and on, a very long list of elected officials in California. The California Chamber of Commerce and Glide Church are all in favor of Prop 3. Opposed, the only opposition I could find was a group called the California Family Council, which believes, and similar to the language you heard before, that this would threaten to fundamentally alter the definition of marriage in California. And I will say that I was looking up who is the California Family Council, and their mission is, quote unquote, advancing God's design for life, family, and liberty through California's church, capital, and culture. So that's the only opposition I could find. And let's see if I wanted to talk a little bit about funders. There's no funded opposition to Prop 3. In favor, this actually surprised me, and I thought it was quite interesting. The biggest single donor to the in support of Prop 3 is the Federated Indians of Grayton Rancheria. Interesting. Kevin De Leon, California Federation of Teachers, other groups that you will recognize, some politicians about labor, ACLU, Planned Parenthood affiliates, the HRC, et cetera, are making donations in favor of Prop 3. And that's it for Prop 3, and back to Betty.
So, and you can see on your note that Prop 3 is an actual constitutional amendment, right? So that also came up through the legislature, but needs the voters to make that amendment authorized, to go, yeah. Okay, I'm going to then move to Prop 4, which is another bond authorization. And it may be interesting to just think a little bit about bonds as sharing the public obligation In Prop 2, it's for education, especially higher education, or community college and K-12. But also Prop 4 is what we're going to be talking about next. This one is about our environment and our planet and climate change. So this is the state saying that we need to invest our public's money via a bond. It'll be paid for by all of us in California, the money into this bond and to pay back the bond. And we'll do it probably in our tax bills, right? That's usually where these state bonds then come down. So this is a public funding for our situation with climate change and the effects of climate change on California. The question, or the title of the bond, of the measure, is authorizes bonds for safe drinking water, wildfire protection, and protecting communities and natural lands from climate risks. The question, should voters let the state sell $10 billion in bonds for various projects to reduce climate risks and impacts? The situation is destructive forest fires, droughts, and floods are becoming more common. Climate change is impacting farming, water quality, and wildlife. Many people don't have access in California to safe drinking water. At the same time, a recent budget deficit led to $9 billion in cuts from programs meant to reduce pollution and greenhouse gas. Climate change affects all Californians. This proposal would let the state now issue another set of money in advance in general obligation bonds. The proceeds of the sale of bonds would be allocated as follows: $3.8 billion for water to protect and increase state water supply and water quality, reduce flood risks, improve stormwater management, and protect and restore rivers, lakes, and streams. $1.5 billion for wildfires and forests to improve local fire prevention capacity, improve forest health and resilience, and reduce the risks of wildfire spread. And a couple for coastal resilience for $1.2 billion, and $1.2 billion for biodiversity protection. $850 million, aren't these numbers now? I mean, this is sort of mind-boggling, the numbers, but $850 million for clean air, $700 million for parks, $450 million for extreme heat mitigation, which is all of a sudden becoming a public necessity, right? Ask Florida, ask any of these places and Texas, where heat mitigation is now a public responsibility. We have to have shelters. We have to help people get air conditioning if they can get that. All of those things that you hear from PG&E, et cetera. And $300 million for agricultural lands to improve the climate resilience and sustainability of agricultural lands. Some funding would be used to offset budget cuts. Most funding would create loans and grants for local governments, Native American tribes, nonprofits, businesses, and state-run agencies. And 40% of the funding must go to activities that will help lower-income communities or communities hit hardest by disasters. The fiscal effects, they estimate that paying back the bond loan would cost the state $400 million a year for 40 years. However, the bonds would fund projects that reduce future risk and the cost of damage from disasters. So we're talking short-term versus long-term here. Supporters say that California faces growing threats from wildfires, water pollution, extreme heat, and other disasters. They're talking about the right investments now can help prevent future damage and costs. California is already paying a price for failing to prepare for drought and climate change. Prop 4 helps us shift from disaster response to disaster prevention. And opponents say the goals identified should be funded with our current state budget. Taxpayers should not be asked for $10 billion more in the form of a bond. Prop 4 provides funding for unproven technologies, and Prop 4 lacks fiscal accountability. Supporters are the League of California, the League of Women Voters of California. They only support, I think it's three of these measures outright, not just in their recommendations, but they are actually advocating for 3 or 4 of these measures, and this is one of them. The school bond is the other one. So 2 and 4 are actually sponsored by League of Women Voters. And the opponent is Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. This raises its head in a number of these measures. And Jim said to me the other day, said, how many people you think are still in the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association? I don't know, but they are there several times in these opponents. Okay? Sorry. Here's your prayer.
Thank you, Betty. Before I dive into Proposition 5, I just wanted to mention, Betty already pointed out that we do have some copies of the ballot recommendations from the League of Women Voters, Friends Committee on Legislation of California, and California Church Impact. But we only provided 3 of each of these. So this is not meant to be a handout that everybody takes. You don't really need them for this hour, and you have ample access to all 3 of these through the church's DCC Anti-Racism Voter Guide webpage. And there's a link to that in the e-news going to be every week. So use those ballot recommendations, but you can get them online. Okay, so Proposition 5 allows local bonds for affordable housing and public infrastructure with 55% voter approval. The question is, should local bond measures to fund housing bonds for low and middle income housing and public infrastructure projects be allowed to pass with 55% voter approval instead of the 66.7% approval currently required? This is the language you've heard so far uses the word bonds, but in a completely different context than the ones that Betty talked about. Those were authorizing state bonds in a specific amount. This one authorizes absolutely no state bonds, and so you won't see a specific amount attached to it. This is authorizing local jurisdictions like cities and counties, and in our case, the Bay Area Housing Finance Authority is a regional authority. Any of those authorities that have jurisdiction and authority to issue local bonds may do so, and this would change the voting threshold for allowing local jurisdictions to do that. And the reason this is on the ballot is because of our affordable housing situation in California. It's a key issue across the state. Many people describe it as a crisis, and it's just so hard to get housing built, and lowering the threshold to allow these local bonds to be passed would help that quite a bit. In terms of fiscal effects, this really is judged to have very little fiscal effect on the state budget, but it would impact local budgets if the local jurisdictions pass bond measures. Supporters of Prop 5 say that this would give local communities more tools to make housing affordable, and it will allow local voters to address community needs, such as housing and safe streets. The opponents say that Prop 5 changes existing protections from high debt caused by bond issues in the California Constitution. Prop 5 pushes, and they also say that Prop 5 pushes cost of infrastructure onto local governments and taxpayers. In addition, some other points to make are that California really does face a significant shortage of affordable housing. we're probably 100,000 units short statewide in terms of housing for low and middle income people. Lowering the voter threshold to pass affordable housing and infrastructure bonds will help local governments meet state mandates for new housing units. The state mandates we're talking about are what's included in the housing elements that every city and other jurisdiction needs to pass. And finally, this Prop 5 would include a ban on using bond funds to buy single-family homes to convert affordable units. And this provision is actually critical for certain organizations that were opposed to this bond measure, one of them being the California Association of Realtors. They initially opposed Prop 5, but it was modified to include this ban on using bond funds to buy single-family homes, and that ban was a condition for the California Association of Realtors to drop their opposition to Prop 5, and so they have dropped opposition. Supporters of Prop 5 include California Professional Firefighters, Habitat for Humanity of California, the League of Women Voters, California Church Impact, and the Friends Committee whose recommendations we're handing out, online. The California Democratic Party, the California Labor Federation, building and construction trades. Also the California Housing Partnership. And I want to mention that many of you know that I'm active with the Multi-Faith Action Coalition in California, in Contra Costa County, and the Multi-Faith Action Coalition is also a supporter of Prop 5. As far as the money is concerned, there has been approximately 29 million, I think, put into the Prop 5 opposition. Only 5 million in favor. Actually 30 million raised in opposition, but 22 million of that came from the California Association of Realtors before the final language of the proposition was settled, and the California Association of Realtors subsequently dropped their opposition. They didn't take their money back, but they dropped their opposition. And other opponents include the National Association of Realtors, California Business Roundtable, California Business Properties Association, California Chamber of Commerce, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. That's it for Prop 5, and I'm going to go right on to Prop 6. And this is the last of the 5 propositions that were put on the ballot by the legislature. Prop 5 was also a constitutional amendment, and Prop 6 is a constitutional amendment put on by the legislature. It would eliminate the constitutional provision allowing involuntary servitude for incarcerated persons. The question is, should the California Constitution be amended to remove the provision that allows involuntary servitude to be used as punishment for a crime, and prohibit punishment, and it also prohibits punishment for refusing to work a work assignment, and allows voluntary work assignments in exchange for credit to reduce sentences. So the question is, should that be approved? Proposition 6, by the way, also is referred to as the End Slavery in California Act. 16 states, including California, currently allow this exception of prohibiting involuntary servitude except in punishment for a crime. So we're not alone in that. This proposal would have some a fiscal effect on the state budget estimated to be somewhere in the tens of millions of dollars annually. And that's because labor currently being done by prisoners at very low wages, which tend to be less than $1 an hour. I think 74 cents an hour is typical of what they're paid. They probably wouldn't get many people volunteering for labor at that rate, so they would probably have to raise the rates, the wage rates that they pay. But that's not, nobody knows how much that effect will be, but it probably will be an effect. Supporters say that Prop 6 Supporters say that Prop 6 restores human dignity by ending forced labor, which constitutes slavery and violates human rights. They also say that it would improve public safety by focusing on rehabilitation of incarcerated people. That means that if a person in prison decides that they need to pursue an education rather than work while in prison, they would have that ability. They wouldn't be forced to work, but would be able to pursue an education instead. There actually is no official argument against the Proposition 6 in your official ballot guide. And so I don't have arguments against it to share with you. The supporters have raised a total of $1.1 million in support. There is no recorded funding for a campaign against Prop 6. The supporters include All of Us Are None Action Network, the American Civil Liberties Union, Northern California, Communities United for Restorative Youth Justice, just like the last 4 measures, it's supported by the League of Women Voters, Church Impact, and the Friends Committee on Legislation of California. It's also supported by the Multi-Faith Action Coalition and the California Teachers Association, the California Legislative Black Caucus. Oh, and by the way, this particular measure was one of more than 100 policy changes recommended by the California Reparations Task Force. So this specific change is one of the things that we as voters can put into place as a step towards that reparations. And opposed, as I said, no money, but Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association. And I think, Carol, you're up next.
Thank you, Doug. Can you hear me okay? Get my best alto voice here. Okay. So I'm talking about, it's an initiative statute, so it was done by petition, and it's for 32. It raises the minimum wage from $16 an hour to $18 an hour, and this wage will be adjusted for inflation. They had some. I think they tried to think ahead a little bit, like with arguments, what about employers with a small amount of employees? So they said employers with 26 or more employees would pay $17 an hour for the remainder of 2024, and then increase to $18 an hour starting on January 1st of 2025. And then employers with less than 25 or less employees would pay $17 an hour starting in January of 2025, and would increase to $18 an hour starting on January 1st in 2026. So, and some employees, like I know fast food, I know there's other employers that are already paying $20 an hour. I have friends that said, oh, I don't want to leave a tip because they're making $20 an hour. And I'm thinking, that's about $41,000 a year. Can you live on that? So, yeah, so it's not that much. But the fiscal effects was, it was kind of, there were pluses and minuses for both of this. It could increase wages for other workers who are currently making a little bit more than $18 an hour. And so they might see an increase in their wage. And then it will likely cost employers more to pay this wage, which means that the increase will probably be passed on to us consumers. So it's also going to increase costs for state and local governments, as they're going to have to pay their employees more and pay more for contracted workers. But it might also reduce state costs for Medi-Cal, or California's Medicaid program, due to lower enrollment in the HHS program. So that was one of the things. Who supports this? California Labor Federation, Unite Here, One Fair Wage, Working Family Party of California, California Democratic Party, League of Women Voters of California, and it's endorsed by Mercury News and San Francisco Chronicle. The contributors raised about $609,000. Kevin DeLeon was he raised $600,000, and Joseph S. Sandberg, or Joe Sandberg, had raised $9,082. $1,000. So he had actually tried to get this on the ballot in 2022. This was Joe Sandberg, but he didn't meet the filing requirements on time, so it got pushed to 2024. Opposed, they raised about $65,000, and those opposed were the California Chamber of Commerce, California Business PAC, and they raised $15,000. California Grocers Association Issues PAC, they raised $15,000. California Retailers Issues PAC raised $15,000. National Federation of Independent Business, they raised $10,000, and Western Growers Service Corps raised $5,000. Oops, and I think that's it on that one. So the League of Women Voters recommend support, as do the Friends, the Quakers, and the Church Impact. They all support this initiative. So that's it, and I think, I forgot who has 33. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to do 33, and to me, this is the second most. 34 is the most complicated of the things for me to understand, and the more I learn, the more complicated it gets. So I'm going to do 33, but I wanted you to know in advance that 34 is connected, and I bet Kristen will probably share that connection when she talks about opponents and supporters. So Prop 33 expands local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property. The question is, should the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act of 1995, a state law, be repealed as local governments can regulate, so that local governments can actually regulate rents? And that's what we need to keep in mind, because I'm going to read actually from the Friends explanation of this. For the last 30 years, rent in California has been controlled by the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act. Under Costa-Hawkins, cities cannot impose rent control on single-family homes, condominiums, or any housing built after February 1, 1995. So that recently build housing, single-family homes and condominiums cannot, you cannot control, do rent control on those currently under the Costa-Hawkins. Proposition 33 will expand the local government's authority to enact rent control on residential property by repealing the Costa-Hawkins Rental Housing Act, thereby allowing cities and counties to limit rent on any housing and limit the rent for first-time tenants, and by adding language to state law to prohibit the state from limiting the right of any city, county, or city and county to maintain, enact, expand residential rent control. So this is taking essentially rent control out of the state and allowing local governments to enact rent control. And I have to say that when we got together, the group of us that are training with the pros and cons, we talked for an hour about this because there were some of us in the room whose kids cannot, they have to rent and they cannot afford the increasing rents that are going on in Walnut Creek, Concord, Danville, wherever. You know, rents are just awful, and 55% of Californians are renters. So they're exposed to this difficulty, having to move, having to have their kids not be able to live near them, all kinds of stuff. And seniors, of course, and low-income people are much more impacted. They don't have the buffer of income to handle those rents, the increasing rents. So the proposal says the state cannot limit local government power to expand or limit. The fiscal effects of doing this are what is a sort of a hedge, and this is why the League is neutral on this. Because the impact on renters and landlords would depend on how many properties are covered by rent control and how much rent increases are limited. Local governments and voters would decide these factors. On the one hand, expanded rent control would provide some people with more affordable housing. We all want that. On the other hand, housing scarcity could occur if landlords sell their properties rather than rent them out, and the value of rental properties could decrease because potential buyers might not want to pay as much for those properties. The impact on local budgets would depend on how many cities and counties pass rent control laws and what landlords do. And this is important because there's been more than 100 laws that have been made based on Costa-Hawkins, and a lot of local governments are already doing this. And they are imposing rent. Look at Berkeley, look at San Francisco. There's a lot of rent control already going on at the local level. But this would throw out Costa-Hawkins all the way across, and all those attempts that are currently going on for local rent control would be lost. Because the state would no longer have they would allow anything to happen, right? Yeah, I think that's right. The measure would likely reduce the amount of money cities, counties, special districts, and schools receive from property taxes. And this decrease would be in the tens of millions of dollars each year. Cities or counties will also need to spend money to enforce rent control laws, and those costs would be paid by landlords. Supporters say that Prop 33 lets local governments enact rent control to protect renters and allow renters to stay in their homes and apartments while more affordable housing is built. But Prop 33 also allows local governments to decide whether and how much to control rents based on the unique situations in their communities. So what do you think is going to happen? Think of Danville versus Concord, right? The higher income communities are going to increase the rent. Anyway, it's going to be very different. Billionaire corporate landlords are currently calling the shots This is what the supporters say, and profit from the lack of housing supply. The opponents of this say that 33 could increase housing costs and block new affordable housing from being built. This could worsen the housing crisis. Prop 33 could eliminate homeowner and renter protections that already exist and could lead to overturning other state affordable housing laws. And Prop 33 could reduce home values. And this is probably the realtors, et cetera. The funny part is that there are major donors on each sides of this issue. And on Prop 33, the major donor with $30.5 million of support for this measure is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. And that apparently, and then there's also an additional $1.5 million of support coming from one individual who happens to be the principal in the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. The AIDS Healthcare Foundation started with receiving a whole lot of donations and supports as a nonprofit foundation to receive money during AIDS epidemic in the 89, 87, 80, then through the 90s, middle of the 90s. And what they did, unfortunately, was they became a huge landlord, and they bought inner city housing in Los Angeles. And they are referred to in one of the things as the slumlords. They have a huge amount of real estate in Los Angeles in particular, but elsewhere, low income and inner city housing. They're the major supporter, and there's also an organization called Yes on 33. And I'm not sure, it doesn't say who that is. YesOn33.org. The opponents are No on 33, with the same thing, No on Prop33.com. But it's primarily the realtors associations and the people who want to be able to have higher prices and higher home values. So I'll leave it at that. And there's a novel in here, you guys. But Kristen will tell you more about 34.
Okay. So Prop 34 is related or is perceived to be related to Prop 33 in ways that I'm going to explain in just a minute. So first of all, Prop 34 would require certain healthcare providers to, and I'm going to explain which healthcare providers in just a second. It would require those healthcare providers to spend one of their 98% of a particular revenue stream on direct patient care. Now, the specific, and I'm going to come back and explain that in just a second, but let me just say, the way that the proposition is written, the eligibility of the providers it applies to, everyone who's analyzed this agrees that there is only one provider in the state of California to whom it would apply, and that is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. So the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, which is based in Los Angeles but provides services in many states, including California, is a healthcare provider as well as a housing provider. And so the opponents to Prop 33, remember the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is a proponent of Prop 33. The opponents of Prop 33 are the proponents of Prop 34. Prop 34 has been called a revenge initiative against the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. So, as I said, Prop 34 would require certain healthcare providers, and I could explain the eligibility, but let me just tell you, it is the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. It is providers who spend $100 million in a 10-year period on anything other than patient care. And even though that sounds like a tremendously huge amount of money, and it is, there actually are other providers other than the AIDS Healthcare Foundation who would spend a huge amount of money on things other than direct patient care. But also, that provider has to also operate multifamily housing reported to have at least 500 high-severity health and safety violations. Right. So that's how you can tell that this is a very specific and targeted effort to hurt the one organization which is a healthcare provider. It receives a federal discount drugs, which I can explain if you care about that, but that's a detail. They spend $100 million in 10-year period on anything other than inpatient care, probably in this case mostly on real estate. And they operate multifamily housing, which has a lot of health and safety violations. And that is a problem that has plagued the AIDS Health Foundation. Again, that's a Los Angeles-based organization. So that the way that the eligibility of the application of this law is written, it would only apply to them. And the penalty for failing to meet the requirements of the statute are quite high. They could revoke their nonprofit status, which would kill the organization, or it could revoke their healthcare license, which would also kill the organization. Well, it would severely damage the organization. And so it would require them to spend, quote, 98% of revenue, again, as I said, for this one revenue stream. Organizations like the AIDS Healthcare Foundation and other nonprofit healthcare providers are supported in part by the federal government, allowing them to get drugs at a discount. They are able to buy those drugs at a discount, but they're reimbursed by insurance at the higher rate. So there's a little bit of a margin there. You follow me? That's one of the ways that these organizations keep the doors open, is because they can pay less for it's like they can buy an aspirin for $1 and they're reimbursed for the insurance at $10. Okay, that's totally not the right numbers. I'm saying that just for illustration. And this statute would force them to take that $9 margin and apply it to patient care, which probably has some benefits. It would also cost a lot for the state to enforce that. That would be a new requirement. There's no federal or state requirement to do that today. Compliance and auditing would be a new requirement for both the organization and the state. So again, this is a law that is focused just on the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. It has quite severe penalties attached to it. And the one other thing that it would do would be to permanently authorize the state of California to negotiate Medi-Cal drug prices on a statewide basis, meaning being able to purchase drugs from the pharmaceutical companies at a negotiated rate, and therefore that would save the state and potentially Medi-Cal beneficiaries money. They can already do that. Okay, so that's what the law does. I'm sure that's clear to all of you. Okay, so the supporters, again, the supporters are like the apartment owners, say that Prop 34 would lower the cost of prescription drugs for Medi-Cal patients. They're saying that because of that thing that would allow the state to buy drugs at negotiated prices. They also say it would force recipients of drug discount benefits, i.e. the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, that's the only one that's affected here, to spend 98% of that particular money on direct health care. The opponents say this is a revenge initiative sponsored by the California Apartment Association, intended to specifically harm the AIDS Healthcare Foundation because the AIDS Healthcare Foundation is sponsoring Prop 33, i.e. rent control. The opponents also say that this use of the initiative process is a very, very dangerous one and could dissuade other advocates from bringing forward important initiatives. That in other words, this is a wolf in sheep's clothing, that it's not about improving patient care, it's strictly about punishing the AIDS Healthcare Foundation specifically for bringing forward a rent control initiative. That's what the opponents say. The opponents also say that Prop 34 is unnecessary because California already negotiates drug prices for Medi-Cal, which is true. The opponents also say that the initiative would be found illegal because this type of initiative that is targeted at one person or entity is illegal under state and federal law. So if it is to pass, it is going to be tied up in litigation. So, again, in favor of this, the California Apartment Association to the tune of $29.5 million. Our friends at Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, the California Chamber of Commerce, and for reasons I cannot explain to you, Assemblymember Evan Lowe. Opposed are the Friends Committee, Church Impact, California Church Impact, the LA Times, and a long list of newspapers, the Bakersfield Californian, SF Chronicle, the Marin, IJ, San Diego Union Tribune, National Organization for Women, the Consumer Watchdog, not surprisingly, the AIDS Healthcare Foundation, although only to the tune of $1 million, California Democratic Party Renters Council, Dolores Huerta Foundation, Monterey County Renters United, Unite Here Local 11, and the Mercury News. So there's a long list of folks opposed. And I think that's all I have on Prop 34. Okay, on to Prop, let's see, I don't think, oh, I'm Prop 35 too, so I'll just stay here. Yes, I'm Prop 35. Okay, so Prop 35. Prop 35 would make something called the MCO tax permanent. The MCO tax is a tax on managed care organizations, including but not limited to Kaiser Permanente, for example. The MCO tax began, I believe, in about 2008, and it was a way of raising money, fundamentally, without getting into a ton of details here, a way for the state to raise money for Medi-Cal. And monies raised through the MCO tax allow the state to what we call draw down money from the federal government. It is, frankly, a somewhat complicated funding scheme where the health plans have both commercial enrollees and Medi-Cal enrollees for which they are paid, right, either by employers or the state of California. Then they pay a tax on their revenue to the state. And there are certain kinds of revenue for the state that the federal government recognizes and then will match, and in this case 9-to-1, for funding Medi-Cal. So it's a bit of a, if you were watching me with 3 cups and a marble, it's a little bit like this. It's a way of allowing the state to raise money from wealthy, if you will, businesses that provide health care, and with this very big match from the federal government. However, the MCO tax, which does all that and allows us to pay, it brings in more money for Medi-Cal. It has only been approved at about 3 years at a time. So it has to be renewed by the state legislature. This Proposition 35 would make the tax permanent. And it requires that ability to draw down funds from the federal government requires approval from the federal government. If that were to happen after Prop 35, then that would provide revenues for low-income families with children, seniors, disabled people, in other words, Medi-Cal recipients, okay? So if Prop 35 passes and then the federal government approves it, as it has done in the past, which it might or might not do in the future, then we get that 9-to-1 match for the dollars for Medi-Cal. Prop 35 would limit how the dollars can be spent, on which types of Medi-Cal services. It would prohibit revenues from being used to replace other Medi-Cal funding. So this is basically a message to the governor and others, okay, we have a nice solid revenue stream for Medi-Cal. You're not going to then take away these other sources of revenue for Medi-Cal because that is what these providers have experienced in the past, that if more money comes in from Medi-Cal, then other money moves away from Medi-Cal. That's a concern that has happened in the budget. It caps administrative expenses and requires audits on how the money is spent. So it's a little bit about the overview of what Prop 35 would do. Supporters of Prop 35 say that California healthcare system is in crisis. The state has redirected, in other words, away from healthcare, more than $30 billion over the last 15 years. So it's redirected $30 billion from healthcare to other things. Medi-Cal needs the money, and this does not raise taxes on individuals. So a yes on Prop 35 raises taxes on the health plans, but not on individuals. It, according to the supporters, would protect and expand access to health care. Currently, Medi-Cal reimbursement rate for providers ranks in the bottom third nationally. There are many, many healthcare providers in California who will not or cannot see Medi-Cal providers because they literally can't afford it. Medi-Cal does not pay enough per visit, so providers lose money on every Medi-Cal visit. Opponents to Prop 35, there's no there has not been any official opposition until recently. Some folks have come together. However, the League of Women Voters and the Friends Committee oppose making what they call oppose making budget decisions this way, at the ballot box. They believe that these decisions, this kind of complex budget making, should be done by the legislature and not by the initiative process. And oppose this proposition for that reason. The League of Women Voters describes Prop 35 as well-meaning but misguided effort. Quote, the League of Women Voters is generally opposed to ballot box budgeting, which limits the legislature's flexibility to make budgetary decisions. So remember, this wouldn't just make budget decisions for this year and next year, but permanently, and makes it quite difficult for the legislature to change them in the future, as the legislature might want to or need to in response to different priorities in the future. So Prop 35 is sponsored by Planned Parenthood and other providers. In favor of Prop 35 are the California Medical Association, which is the association of doctors in the state of California, Planned Parenthood Affiliates of California, the California Hospital Association, the California Dental Association, California Primary Care Association. Both political parties support Prop 35. I will say my personal opinion on that is because they don't want to have to deal with it in the legislature. And church impact, interestingly. The big funders are the hospitals, something called Global Medical Response, which I think is probably the ambulance and EMT providers, CMA, again, the doctors, the CMA has a big political arm, and at a much lower level, the Primary Care Association. Opposed is the League of Women Voters. A small group of providers came forward very late in the game in opposition, and that is, my understanding is that is because they got some things in this year's budget that they're afraid they might not get in future budgets. So that's the California Pan-Ethnic Health Network, the Children's Partnership, California, and then separately California Alliance for Retired Americans. The Friends Committee, as I mentioned, for the same reason as the League of Women Voters, that is a concern about ballot box budgeting, and a bunch of newspapers, which I believe oppose it for the same reason as the League, which is it's not good policy to make financial or budgeting decisions via initiative process. So the Chronicle, Mercury News, East Bay Times, the San Diego Union Tribune, and an organization called California Healthline, which is a medical newsletter. And there are no reported contributions in opposition. And now it is my turn to turn it over to Carol, I believe.
So this is the last proposition. This is Proposition 36. And it would allow felony charges and increased sentences for drug and theft. So what it would do, it would increase penalties for theft and drug crimes. It could also reclassify some theft and drug misdemeanors as felonies. So if somebody's in jail for a misdemeanor, it could get bumped up. It would create a new category called a treatment mandated felony. And this means that persons could opt for treatment versus prison, but they could face up to sentences up to 3 years if they didn't complete their treatment. And so one of the reasons this was put on the ballot was during the pandemic, prosecutors, law enforcement, and big box retailers blamed Proposition 47, which was passed into law about 10 years ago, for the increase in crime and homelessness. So the supporters, and they raised a lot of money. I got this information from Cal Matters, and for most of the things I could put, like how much each group contributed, this list is very long. And so I recommend, if you want to see how much they did, each place did raised. So, but the total amount was $13.6 million raised. And supporters feel that Proposition 36 would combat homelessness, which is up 50% since Prop 47 was passed. And the supporters are Walmart, Target, Home Depot, California District Attorneys Association, California Correctional Peace Officers Association, California Republican Party. I think I'm going to put this one little line here, like in my own 12 Days of Christmas, and the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, California Chamber of Commerce, media endorsement by Mercury News and San Diego Union Tribune. The opponents say that there are no really good studies on criminal justice and homelessness that found harsher punishments nor the threat of harsher punishments would get people off the streets and would have any impact on crime. Prop 36 would spend hundreds of millions of dollars on court and prison costs without measurably reducing crime or homelessness, and which would take away funds for schools, health care, and other essential services. Prop 36 would invoke a return on the war of drugs, which voters rejected 10 years ago with Prop 47. And it was really, like some of the books I read, like it would be mass incarceration, usually for people of color. And so this is what the opponents. So the opponents are Governor Gavin Newsom, Assembly Speaker Robert Rivas, Senate President Pro Tem Mike McGuire, Alliance for Safety and Justice, the ACLU of Northern California, California Democratic Party, the League of Women Voters of Northern California, and the media endorsement by the Los Angeles Times. So, actually all three groups that we listed on the grid, League of Women Voters oppose, as do the Friends and the Quakers, and the Church Impact also oppose this ballot. So that's it.
Any questions, let us know. We're happy to be here. And again, the resources are awesome.
Point out that we do have a